I've wanted to do this video for the longest time, like literally months, but I've never really known when to do it or like what exactly to talk about. Until recently, I thought it was just time to talk about one of the things that I have done most of in my knitting and crocheting journey, and that is scrap yarn projects. Quite a lot of my projects, especially the older ones, have been made with scrap yarn, mainly because right at the start when I picked up crocheting again and I taught myself how to knit, I bought all my yarn secondhand mainly just to save money. Naturally, most of the yarn that I used was very mismatched and I had different amounts and quantities of different types of yarn just based on whatever I was able to source in the charity shops. And so I got very used to only making scrap yarn projects really. I would say there's a difference in the type of scrap yarn projects you can make depending on the quantity of your yarn. If you have lots of little balls of yarn laying around, I don't think you can expect to plan a lot because you just don't know how much you have of each color, how much you have of each fiber. Whereas sometimes you have larger quantities of scrap yarn and you're able to maybe plan out the kind of colorways and the pattern a little bit more. You also need to think about the fibers that match the specific pattern or project that you're following. Basically anything summery like shorts, bikinis, crop tops, t-shirts, that kind of thing. For those, it's probably best to just stick to cotton and linen yarns and mix and match those just because they'll be the most breathable and you're not going to want to have anything fuzzy mixed in with those projects. And basically everything else you can make with any type of yarn and you can mix and match them together really nicely. So you can mix acrylic and wool and mohair, all those types of things, because they're going to keep you warm no matter what. I'm basically going to make this into a two-part video because when I was planning this, I had so much to talk about and it would have just been way too long. So today I'm going to share all of the projects that I've done before and kind of talk about some of the things that I've learned. And then in the second part, I'm going to talk more about inspirations, designers and patterns you need to know and you need to follow if you want to have a bit more guidance in sort of the scrap yarn project sphere. When you have a lot of scrap yarn, the storage solution can be a little bit tricky, and I speak from experience because I essentially just used to chuck all of my scraps into one big box and I would kind of just like go through it and pick out some bits as and when I needed it. That turned into an absolute mess very quickly because everything got super tangled up and I essentially spent like half a day untangling everything and rolling everything up, and it was a complete nightmare, and I swore to myself that I would never let it get to that point again. So how I am looking after my scraps now is I basically categorize it similar to what I said about having smaller bits of yarn and larger bits of yarn that you've left over. I have a clear box of small scraps and they are all the tiny little scraps that I have. They're not all perfectly rolled up, but they're essentially just kind of, I don't know, little bits from different projects. I believe all of this is mainly acrylic yarn. I would suggest, if you're able to, keeping your fibers separate because they will inevitably kind of mix and get knotted up a little bit, but the knots are a lot easier to fix if the yarn is the same. If I had a bunch of mohair in here as well, I think everything would just get super messy. So this is my acrylic scrap box and I actually mainly use that for granny squares. Then I also have a box of all my mohair yarn. I'm able to source these really nicely in the charity shops, so it was worth keeping a box just for that. A lot of these are more kind of bigger scraps, so there's a bit more yarn to it, but they are still just very random quantities. Then I used to keep all my cotton scraps in this box. It isn't so much scraps anymore, they're just full balls of yarn because I recently done a lot of cotton projects and gotten rid of a lot of my scraps, but that is where I used to keep them in. So you can see I'm keeping everything very separate. For all the scraps that are super tiny, like I'm talking offcuts from your projects when you're weaving in ends, this is full of that super tiny stuff. So you can see in here, this is literally the tiniest little bits of yarn all kept in here. So whenever I work on a project, I cut some bits off, I just chuck it all in here. This just means that any of my ends don't get tangled up with my proper balls of yarn and nothing gets super tangled because these little bits, you don't want them to create a mess. I don't really know what I'm actually going to end up doing with all of this because some of the ends are just way too small for me to even like weave them into a project. But if anything, this can be great stuffing for any kind of like 3D projects that I make, or you can obviously also brush all that yarn together and then you can make your own stranded yarn out of that. Whether that's something I'll get into later on, I don't know. But that is essentially my yarn storage situation. Just wanted to share that ahead of going through my project because I know how messy it can get. When I planned this video, I realized how many scrap yarn projects I actually made that I can share with you. So there's a lot coming up. Before I show you any of that, I just want to quickly talk about today's sponsor, Craftsy. Craftsy is your online resource for all things creative. They have an abundance of over 2,000 classes, including topics such as knitting, crocheting, sewing, baking, quilting, and so much more. For me in particular, for the longest time, I really wanted to learn how to properly write knitting patterns. I find crochet patterns a lot easier to read and write personally, but I have never felt brave enough to actually attempt writing a knitting pattern. Craftsy had the perfect course available, all about pattern writing for knitters, so hopefully I can apply that soon and actually publish one of my own knit patterns. But like I said, there's so much out there for all types of creatives and DIYers, and you can also start any skill levels, so it can take you from a beginner all the way to being advanced at the skill that you're choosing. If you want to try Craftsy for yourself, then the first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will get a full year of premium membership with Craftsy for only $149. If you've never crocheted before, in 12 months time, you'll be a pro, I'll promise you that. So thanks again so much to Craftsy, and let's get into some actual scrap yarn projects that I can't wait to show you. I actually have to stand up for this so I can show you properly, and I have to put on my glasses, otherwise I literally can't see anything. From here to my camera, I see nothing without my glasses. Like I said, there is a lot to go through. Look at all of these colors. It's honestly amazing. This is so heavy. The first and most obvious thing is anything granny square. In particular, this I made ages and ages ago, and then this one I made more recently because I made a video tutorial for it. So if you want to recreate this, there actually is a tutorial that you can follow. I'll obviously link it down below. Genuinely, the amount of scrap yarn you can use up for this is incredible. For this one, I actually bought like a bunch of scrap yarn from the charity shop because you don't actually need to buy full balls of yarn. You really only want like tiny little bits for each of the rows. Also, what I love about these types of granny square projects is that you can literally do them on the go. Most of the time, like whether you're making a jumper or a blanket, the final piece doesn't actually get attached right until the end. So I would literally have a bag full of like random scraps or balls of yarn and a crochet hook, and I'd just be able to do, I don't know, 5 granny squares on my bus ride to work. I just think that's really handy and so fun. Obviously this counts for any type of granny square projects. I've made a blanket before, I've made a balaclava, which I believe I undid and turned into one of these jumpers, I'm pretty sure, because I literally didn't wear the balaclava. I made mittens. Yeah, I made these mittens out of granny squares as well. You just need a little bit more yarn to obviously do all the finishing. Now that's a really fun project. Essentially anything granny square, I promise you can use all your scraps up for. I didn't really plan which order I would show you these things, so if this seems a bit jumbled, I do apologise. The granny square jumpers are all made with acrylic yarn, and then I made this cardigan all with cotton yarn. This is one of the recent projects that I was mentioning earlier when I cleared all of my cotton scrap yarn box out, and I attached all of it to create this lovely, gorgeous jumper. I've spoken about it loads of times in my recent videos because this is like my absolute favourite make of 2024. I used up a lot of scrap yarn, but I had a lot left afterwards. Weirdly, this doesn't actually use up that much yarn, but I just completely love the outcome. I love how random all the colors are. And yeah, in terms of like color layout and stuff, I literally didn't plan anything out. I just followed my intuition, and I kind of thought about alternating between contrasting colors, so putting like a yellow, pink and blue together, and also sometimes complementary colors all within the same hue. So you can see here's quite like a heavy blue theme, then it's a bit more of a green theme here, and just alternating between that so you get a nice variety of different colors. Ages ago, I started this project to again use up a bunch of my acrylic yarn, and this was going to be like a jacket. I want to say this is the back piece, and then these were going to be front pieces, I think. I don't really know. My freehand skills weren't that great back in the day. But yeah, instead of going like width-wise, I went lengthwise, horizontal, vertical, I'm not sure. you know what I mean. And with this, I actually held the strands double, so obviously that way you can get rid of your scraps even better. I think I mainly went for complementary colors, so I kept like a yellow with an orange, green with green, blue with blue. I would really like to finish this at some point, but I don't really work with acrylic that much more, which is why I believe I was never able to finish this. I think this could be such a cool jacket. Now, after I did the cotton crochet cardigan, like I said, I still had a lot of scrap yarn left over, and I made this baby bodysuit for one of my friends. I gifted it at her baby shower, and I was able to pretty much finish up all of the scrap yarn I had at that point. I really, really loved that project. I just find scrap projects with knit very, very tricky sometimes, especially if it's a lot of different color changes, because weaving in the ends is a nightmare in general, whether it's knitting or crochet, it doesn't matter. But I think especially with knitting, I find it a lot harder to weave in my ends and hide them smoothly, whereas I think crochet is just a lot more forgiving if it's a bit bulkier, if it's imperfect. I feel like a lot of the time with the projects that I make anyways, it just adds to the charm a little bit. But yeah, for this bodysuit, I followed a pattern by Josephine Dyring. It was a big hit at the baby shower. It was just the cutest thing ever. Then another great thing to do is a patchwork project. I've made a couple jumpers to do with patchwork. This yarn is the fuzzy colors, funky colors, I forgot, hold on. It's called Flashy Colors, and I got a bunch of it on eBay ages ago, and I've slowly made my way through it, made a bunch of different projects from it, until I got to a point where I had like a bigger amount of each color, but not enough to make like a dedicated project out of any of those colors. So I just ended up making big random squares in a stripy design, and I sewed them all together. You can see here, it's like the middle seam where I sewed it together. Obviously, this is really great when your scraps are a bit larger. You're able to kind of plan out your color schemes a bit better. I didn't really plan too much, but I guess there was planning in the sense that I was able to repeat certain stripy colorways, which maybe if I had less scraps, I wouldn't have been able to. This is really cute. And then I also made more of a muted version. I made this super, super thick and cozy jumper out of a very, very random mix of scrap. I believe this is the Hobbycraft lead of the pack yarn. Then this collar is just a random acrylic yarn that I had. This is like a linen blend yarn that I was given. Then I also held that double with the lead of the pack as well. Again, this is random acrylic. What else do we have? This like white yarn, I believe I once got at B&M randomly. And again, I was in a situation where they weren't really like tiny scraps, but they weren't enough either to make one big project out of. So for the body, I kind of created these panels where sometimes I'd knit along this way and I'd attach it, and then I would knit lengthwise and attach it to that. Then obviously the upper body's just continued on knitting the normal kind of way. Same with the arms, they're just attached. In terms of colors, these blend in really, really nicely, and I just love how imperfect it is. Like, I on purpose left some of the ends loose so you could tell that it was meant to be kind of a bit more of a patchworky kind of thing. This was a super random project. I got given all of this super like thin cotton yarn, which I very, very rarely, if ever, work with. But my grandparents moved house, and in the new house that they moved into, the previous owner had left a bag of all of this type of yarn. I loved all the different colors together, but I just didn't really know what exactly I could make with it until, yeah, I just turned it into this super random patchworky vest design. I did like a bunch of just granny stitches and granny clusters. I did some more like meshy kind of clusters, and yeah, that is kind of the pattern that I followed. It's a bit random, and then I also just kind of like framed it a little bit. It just shows that with a bit of texture through all the different stitches and with a nice color scheme, this looks intentional. Like, it looks like I picked out this yarn for this project, but it was more that I picked the project for the yarn, which is essentially all of my projects right when I began. I still struggle buying yarn specifically for a pattern or a project I want to make, because like I said, for years I would find a project that would suit the yarn that I sourced in the charity shops. Then I made a few knit projects which I don't have anymore, but I wanted to share anyways. One of them was this knit vest that I think was maybe one of my very first knit projects, maybe my first or second project ever. It was such a mix of different fibers. I literally just knit 2 rectangles for the front and the back, and then made kind of like a turtleneck around it, which I still don't know to this day how I figured that out, because I was such a beginner. And then because I made the rectangles quite small, I just attached it with some like bows at the side. I love how vibrant that one turned out. I never ended up wearing it, but I still get a lot of inspo whenever I look at that photo, just in terms of texture and like different colorways. There's something about all the different fibers being brought together in that vest, just works so beautifully. Then I made my very first Raglin knit project, I think sometime at the start of this year, and I again used all of the flashy colors yarn for that as well. I really went for it with all the different stripes. I finally figured out how to change colors when you're knitting in the round. Because I haven't got the project on me, I don't really know how I ended up weaving in those ends. I don't think I did too good of a job. I think some of the ends were still kind of poking out every now and again, but that's the beauty of having a handmade project. They are just sometimes ends peeking out, and that's fine. Very similar to that, again, this is ages and ages ago now, I made this mohair cardigan. Unless I mention a specific pattern that I followed, you're just gonna have to assume that I free-handed them, because most of, if not all of my earlier projects were all freehand. Following a pattern was just too overwhelming for me at the time. But yeah, I made this mohair jumper, and these are all different mohair fibers that I was able to source in the charity shops. They would just very randomly have a bunch of different colors. You can slightly feel the different textures of that yarn, just where, you know, the weight was slightly different, but it's not too obvious. And I was able to follow quite a nice color scheme with that as well. And I think for most of the yarn, I would literally just knit as long as I was able to with the yarn that I had, and then I'd switch color. Because you can see at the top here, actually, none of the colors really repeat until later on, which is something that I added in addition a few months ago. Actually, I think I repeated some of the colors in the arms, so as I was knitting, I must have kind of considered that and kind of finished a stripe before I ran out of yarn, so I was able to continue it in another area. Obviously, that's something to consider when you're doing a scrap yarn project. You know, do you want the colors to be repeating every now and again, or are you literally just going to do one color, the next color, until all your colors have run out? This really shows that a scrap yarn project can literally be made with any type of fiber. Actually, speaking of Raglin, before I learned how to knit Raglin, I learned how to crochet Raglin, and I instantly love crocheting Raglin to use up my scraps. So I created this cropped Raglin jumper, which I'm trying to think what yarn I used for that. I want to say that also was the flashy colors yarn. I had so much random scraps laying around from that type of yarn. Honestly, a lot of scrap yarn projects were born from that. But yeah, I made this cropped one, and it was so lovely. I really enjoy doing Raglin with like chain stitches, so you get a really sort of nice meshy look. And then this is another Raglin project that I made, and this is very mixed and matched. There is a bunch of acrylic, there's mohair here, more acrylic, there's like a bit of sort of a linen-y type of yarn. When I made this, I was at home in Germany, and I just had a bunch of this scrap yarn with me, and there was nothing else I could have done. None of the yarn was enough for one entire project, so I just mixed it all together into this dress, which I really love. It's just that the meshy fabric with the kind of mix and match of the fibers doesn't make this a summer dress, so this very much has to be layered with kind of like tights or over skirts and be worn more as a jumper rather than like a summery dress. But I love all the like different textures, like having more of a granny stitch here then to more of a chain stitch. And with that, we're almost getting to the end. I don't make too many accessories. I'm very much a big project, big jumper type of person. I obviously already showed you the mittens that I made, but I also made a Scrappy hat, which I literally had like this amount per color, which as you can see, none of these colors would have made one big hat. So I just turned them into one hat together, which is really cute. You can obviously go even more scrappy and almost have this kind of scrappiness as a hat. That could be so cool as well. Probably my favorite scrap yarn project ever, especially if you have loads of tinier scraps. I think a lot of the projects projects that I showed you, you'd need a bit more fabric per color and fiber. But if you don't have that, making a scrunchie is the perfect thing. This one is so worn out because I literally wear it all of the time. All my hair is like tangled up in there. So I made another one, and I made a tutorial for how to make this. Again, it will be linked down below. I also released a pattern booklet with instructions on how to make the hat, the scrunchie, the mittens, and like some other things, bonnets or something. Again, I will link it below so you can check it out if you are interested in some easy accessory projects. But yeah, these are so cute. Always get compliments when I wear these because they are so colourful and fun. I hope you can see that. Okay, I did warn you there was a lot to go through, but I feel like I powered through it, which is pretty good. Like I said, there will be a part 2 where I'll go more into some proper patterns that you can follow, because obviously all of these are very much freehand, which I know isn't, you know, for everyone. But yeah, that will be coming soon. Also, don't forget to check out Craftsy. Click the link in the description so you can claim your premium membership. And yeah, I really appreciate you watching as always, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.